Cloud Infra testing as well as Terraform. So our speakers Monika, Sharma, and Ankur, Jain, we are having to explain you about this and give the real-time demo as well. Monika had already gave the introduction. She is 16 years of experience she has, and she is with ThoughtWorks for 2 years, and has experience in performance testing framework as per the requirements. And she's the blogger, and she is contributing for QA blogs, QA spaces, and yeah, about Ankur, he's having 5 years of experience and 2 years with in that 2 years with ThoughtWorks. He is also having a vast experience in developing test strategies and web automation framework for microservice-based web application. So both of them are eager to learn new technologies. And thanks for joining us. Over to you both. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll start sharing my screen. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes. Sam.
Okay, so thank you for the wonderful introduction. The session is called All About Terratest. So we'll walk you through through the infrastructure of basically cloud infrastructure, and how you can build it, and then also how you can test it, right? So cloud infrastructure, it's basically a term a lot of us have heard a lot, and it's built up of components, right? It's cloud computing. It's built up of some hardware. There's abstraction of resources which is there. There needs to be a storage. There needs to be a network. So few popular terms that are there is there can be 3 different types of cloud services: SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS, which is software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, right? Now let's elaborate a little on how this can be categorized into. Hardwares would be your network. From network point of view, it will be your switches, routers, then comes firewalls, you need load balancers, you need storage arrays, there needs to be backup devices that need to be in place, and then needs to be server to run it, right? Virtualization would be that all hardware needs to be available to you, right? So making those resources accessible would be abstraction. From the network point of view, you want to transfer data from external sources also, right? So relying on those routers and switches and building a network out of it. And when it comes to storage, it's the old school, the hard disks, hard drives, and there'll be some flash storage which is required, right? Next, we move to infrastructure as code. What does it mean, right? So it's just definition of infrastructure with a bunch of scripts, some configurations. There needs to be server templating, and then you need to provision it. When you write this as a piece of code, you can essentially deploy it as a process, and then you have this wonderful infrastructure which is called a cloud infrastructure, and that's generally what is popularized as DevOps a lot nowadays, which is that you start building everything as a code. May it be servers, databases, network, there can be log files, application configurations, documents, automated tests, everything can be done that way, right? Now, we talk about a tool, a framework, you can say, which is called Terraform. And what essentially Terraform is, it's a open source infrastructure as a code tool, right? And it provides a consistent CLI flow through 1,000 plus cloud providers, and you can easily run them at the same time. And how the configurations are declared is it uses the cloud providers APIs to do that. And you might have heard of other cloud frameworks or tools that do that. But why are we talking about Terraform? Because Terraform is something that it's a framework that's available and accessible to all cloud providers. And also you can build things locally using Dockers, Packers, there's Kubernetes support and other cloud provider support, which is the popular ones is AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. It's easily configurable as a code. That's why we're talking about it. And you can, when it's code, you can track your changes, you can plan your changes, and then there's a very high level description because it's in YAML. So it's in Terraform. So it's a well documented form of description, which is very high level to understand. Uh, Version control, which I talked about, and then over that you can also write automated test over it on Terraform, which we'll talk about further. And then it's the right tool for managing the infrastructure also, because I'll talk about that. There are steps in which you can plan what changes go in, and then uh, there's very small chance of mistakes to happen because it's using the cloud provider's API, right? So if something goes wrong, it doesn't get implemented. There's good live community support that is in place, and the speed of execution is very fast, and there's operational can happen quickly. Now, how Terraform Flow would look like? So since I said there's a live community that is in place, so there is a public module registry, right, from which you can write infrastructure as a code. So you write your piece of code, and then there's a step of planning where you see and preview what changes go in and get deployed. And there is an apply command that goes into place, which is basically deploying your changes on the cloud provider. And that can be any cloud provider depending on which you're using, right? Now let's just have a quick look of what I'm talking about and how Terraform would look like. So I'll just open up a command prompt for you. I'll go to a practice directory and I'll create a new one. Let me just make this a little bigger so you can see. Let's see, this is Vodka. Okay, so we go to Terraform Vodka. And I already have Terraform, but if you do not have Terraform and you're on a Mac machine, you can just say brew install Terraform. That also works. Sorry, Terraform. You can do that, or you can actually go to, let's go here again, escape this, and you can actually go to Terraform's official documentation, which is terraform.io/downloads.html, and you'll see it's available for all popular operating systems you can use. And you can just, if you're on a Windows, you can just select directly on what version of bit you are in, or same goes for Linux. And let's come back here. Let me open the new directory I made, which is called, it's in practice. And let's go to Terraform Vodka and let's open that. I trust it. I just created it. And okay, so something which you'll find very commonly is that you'll find a main.tf file. TF stands for a Terraform format of the file. And how do you write a Terraform file, right? So you write Terraform over here, and then we talk about a required version, because everyone will not have the same version of Terraform you're using. So I'll mention the version. And my machine has a version which is greater than or equal to 0.12, which is the current one running. And now I'm just writing a simple file. So I'll just say a hello world using it. And let's say this is hello world. And then I give it a value which outputs hello world. Yeah. Now, as I mentioned, there'll be some steps which we'll perform, which will be I'll have to initialize this with Terraform. So I'll say Terraform init. And it says that it has initialized my directory with Terraform. And next I'll say Terraform LAN to see what changes go in. Right, so it shows that you've created a method which is hello world, and it'll print out hello world for you. And let's apply these, and it says apply. It shows, so apply is basically a combination of plan plus the deployment. So it is all again showing me what output changes are going in, and then it is going to prompt me and ask me whether I want to perform those changes or not. So I'm going to say yes. And you see the output over here would be, in the output, you can see that it's saying hello world over here. Right now, this is something which is you'll commonly find. And what I'm going to do is I am going to bring in my AWS instance. It's a free version of AWS, which I've been using. I'll bring that in. Okay, let me try and refresh this, and let's see if it's there. Give me a moment, I might have to log in. And login's done. There we go. So you'll see that there's no instance that is available here right now. And let's also go to the EC2 dashboard. So you'll see that there's no instance over here. Just some basics of AWS that you'll need to know, that you'll need a security group. And we always have a default security group when you create it. So we'll use the same. And the other thing is that you need to create also, so there's something called an IAM dashboard. If you go there, you'll also need to create a user group, which I've already created for you. So we don't want to use a root user, right, for any machine. So you'll have to create a user group. It's called Terraform admin, which I've created. So you can just go and create a group over here if you want. And you'll give it a name, and then you can define the policies which you want to use. And in that group, you can add actually a user. You can add the user, give it a name, and then you can define whether you want to access it programmatically or not. And you'll get an access key and a secret key. So this is something which I've already done for you. This is the basics you need to do before you want to follow this demonstration or create any instance on AWS, right? Programmatically. So something which we are going to do is we're going to transform this file and create an instance on AWS. That'll be the basic, but then you can always create any application through the same formats. So what you need to mention now is that what provider are you using? We're using AWS. And you'll need two things which I mentioned earlier, which is the access key. I have an access key already generated. I'll put it here. And then you need a secret key. That also I've already generated and put it here. Okay. Next, that is important is that you need to specify the region you are using. So I'm using a US East 2, which is Ohio. So I'll write region, and I'll mention that as US East 2. Now, we need to define a resource. So we are using an AWS instance, right? And I'm gonna name it as, let's say, example, because it's just an example instance we're doing. Now with AWS, there's something called AMI, which is Amazon Machine Image, and we're going to use an Ubuntu 18.04, and I already have an image for this location, which is Ohio. If you don't have one, what you can do is you can search here. You can, let me go back, sorry. You can come to the EC2 dashboard. You can say launch instance, and then you'll see a bunch of AMIs. You can say my AMIs if you've created a new one, or there are some quick starters. You can also search for Ubuntu. So you'll see there are a bunch of them. We're using this one. The ID may not match because I'm using a different version of it, because we want to run something called a busy box on it. So I'll mention the AMI I'm using, and then we'll talk about the instance type. So we're using a free instance, and there's something called a micro, EC2 micro, which you can use, which we'll see again here. So let's go to EC2. Let's try and launch an instance. Let's say this one. And then it'll give you which one do you want to use, right? We want a T2 because all I'm going to do is just create an index.html file and then show you that you can see a hello world. Okay. We don't want to pay anything. We just want a free version. So we're going to use a T2 micro. And something which I missed and I didn't talk about, which I should have, is this security group, right? So I told you there's a default one now, but that default one has all the ports open. We don't want to use that one. I don't want right now for all of you to write that IP and you can see hello world. I don't want to do that. I just want to keep it to myself and have a security group to a specific port to it. So we'll use the basic security rules out of it. And there'll be two things. There'll be an inbound and an outbound, which is the incoming request and the outgoing request. So we'll not mention anything that is outgoing, okay? Because we don't want this instance to call anything outside the our current network. Let me switch back. So we'll mention a new security group, and the ID we'll pick up from default. So we'll use AWS security group, and we'll create an instance dot ID. Spell it wrong. So we'll use an instance ID. Okay. Now, since I said we're creating this small hello world, so let's define that user data, and I'll write a file here itself. And in that file, I'm gonna say it's a bash script, and that bash script will start with bin bash, right? And in that, let's say echo, and we're gonna echo the same thing which we did earlier, which is hello world. So let's copy this. Let's say hello world over here. And I said it's gonna be an index.html file, right? And we're gonna use a busybox. So busybox is like any small application server which you can use, and it's just gonna run this index.html, and it'll show you an HTML page with that. Okay, So we want to do an HTTP request, and you want to force that request to be opening on 8080. So that's my port, and I'm gonna end this file. Now let's come back to the security group. So we want a resource which is AWS. Let's copy this right away. Oopsie, what did I do? Yeah, security group, and this is an instance, right? So now it's going to create two things, which is the AWS instance and a security group. So I talked about an inbound and outbound. The inbound will be the ingress. It is called ingress, and we'll just define from port. So we want from 8080 and to 8080. So we'll receive that request also on 8080, right? And we're gonna use a protocol which we are all familiar with, which is TCP. And as I said, I don't want everyone to call that IP and get access to everything. So we'll block it, block everything else, and just accept requests on 8080. That's the definition. But we don't want the same output because we want a public IP to be exposed. Okay, I'm gonna say public IP. Oops, public IP, and we want the value to be, it's a dynamic value, right? So we want the AWS instance example, this one, and we want its public IP. Let's see public IP, and we want this public IP. Let's see if we can do the same. Let's initialize this again. Now you might ask, why are we initializing the same thing again and again? That's because we didn't have a provider earlier. So now it has to fetch the APIs and communicate with the APIs of this cloud provider, right? So that's why I'm initializing it. And you'll see that it's trying to find the latest version of HashiCorp, which is what Terraform is of AWS. And it's fetching that version and installing it. It might take a few more seconds. It's happening in real time. So maybe in the meanwhile, let's also see what has been created. So there's a Terraform log file which has been created, and the Terraform TF state which has been created. So the state actually defines the previous version which was there, which is that you just want an output of hello world, and it automatically defined that it's a type string which is there. It created a lineage because next time if you make a change, it will show what you're going to plan and apply. The Terraform version it picked up, and the version of the current continuation file, right? It didn't define any resources because there were not any resources involved. Let's come back here and let's see what's happening. It is not supposed to take this much time. Let's try again. Let's do Terraform minute. See, it's done. I don't know what went wrong in that call. Maybe some network glitch that happened. And you see that it fetched Terraform. Let's see. Yeah, it fetched Terraform, that particular version of AWS which we talked about. And this time let's plan again, or let's just apply directly because we will also deploy this at the same time. So I do Terraform apply. And it shows all the changes that we're going to make. So it's saying you're creating something. It says you're creating a resource with the called example. It's also mentioning the AMI we are using. And it says a lot of properties will be assigned automatically once you start applying. It also says, as you mentioned, an instance type. There's some user data image that is being created. All these block devices would automatically be assigned when you apply it. It says that this particular resource, which is the security group we're creating, is again managed by Terraform. To port, from port, the protocol, that's everything that we've defined, and rest of it will get applied automatically. The changes of the output have changed. The hello world is no longer there, and we instead are taking out the IP address. So I'm going to say yes to that. And you'll see that it started creating things over here. So we'll move back to our instance, and in this security group, you see that there's a new security group that has been created, and it has Terraforms and there's some ID, right? This is not the best view. Let's click on this one, and over here you can see better, I think. Right? So it says port range is 8080 and the source is 0.0.0/. That's what we mentioned. Let's come back to instances, and you see that there is one running instance which it is creating. It's still creating, right? And it's done. It says it's created two of them, and there's an output IP over it. So this output is available to us, and it still says that it's initializing. So maybe we can come back to this and check again whether see an HTML of this or not. And let's move ahead with the presentation, and we'll come back to this when it's up and ready. We'll talk about infrastructure testing, and I'll hand over to Monika.
Yeah. So before that, is my voice is audible?
Yes,
Okay. Yeah. So I can go ahead. So what we have seen till now is how to create infrastructure using Terraform. But the next question is how to test the infrastructure. And if we skip this testing, then what is the consequence and what is the impact on our ecosystem or on our infrastructure as a whole? Okay. We'll move to the next slide. Yeah. So what's the need for infrastructure testing? Like, as we all know that currently we are doing the testing which are very UI specific. Uh, when it comes to you writing the UI test, API test, all those tests. But what's the need for infrastructure testing? Why we are going to do that? Okay. So if not infrastructure testing, then how we are going to ensure that deployed infra is working how it's supposed to be? Let's say we have deployed our infra, okay, and we are not testing it, and we are just directly deployed it to the prod, and that's all. So there is no any round of smoke or sanity, or not a single round of testing at all. Okay. then then what is the impact, like how we are going to ensure that okay it's working correctly? Okay. Or maybe the another example is how to ensure that services deployed by Cube is working correctly. Okay. So all these questions arise maybe from QA perspective. Okay, that okay we want to ensure that uh, everything which is deployed to a prod from infrastructure perspective work as, but but the actual question arise, uh, let's say if we don't do the infrastructure testing, then what can happen is that whole ecosystem can break or fail in if infrastructure is not tested, and can result in the disruption. Okay, so this is the major cause that to avoid these failures in the ecosystem, to avoid these failures in the infrastructure, okay, we have to ensure that our infrastructure tests are in place. We'll move to the next slide. So we have discussed what's the need of infrastructure testing. Okay, now we have to get into what is infrastructure testing. So infrastructure testing is about testing the application runtime environment, which is collection of building blocks or components that can be used for supplying functionalities towards other application. Okay, so if we have system configuration platforms, like in the previous section we have seen Terraform, right? If our infrastructure is in Terraform, let's say like Terraform, we have other platforms which are Chef, Puppet, Salt Stack, Ansible. Okay, and yeah, so if we have these platforms with an integration with the cloud providers like AWS and let's say Microsoft Azure, so if we have these in place, okay, so how we are going to do this infrastructure testing? So with infrastructure testing, we can cover all these platforms. Okay, we'll move to the next slide. Next is Terratest. So as we are using Terraform as infrastructure as a code for our demo, so we are going ahead to use Terratest.
Do
So
we
what
get
is,
our instance by now?
yeah, you can check it.
Okay, let's do that. We'll come back to this. Let me escape the presentation for now, and let's check if this is up and ready. Let's refresh this. And the status says that both the checks have passed. And let's try and hit, do we get hello world? So we get a hello world, and that's what we were trying to execute. So let's see our main file, and it just said that there should be some output, and there's a file that should echo hello world, right? And our TF state has also changed. Resources are being added. It's managed mode. There's AWS instance. The name is example. The providers is AWS. The EMI is over here. The region is over here. And there's a bunch of resources. And uh, there's also a security group instance that we created, right? So that's all there in the Terraform state right now. And let's move back to the presentation and understand how can we test it. Before that, I want to do is that I want to destroy this instance. So I'll also give you a command, because we don't want to keep on running an instance for no reason. So there's a command called Terraform destroy, which you can use to just destroy this instance. It's again going to ask me what changes are going to happen, and I'll say yes, and I'll go ahead and destroy that. Yes, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, there is a question in the Q&A.
Yes.
So, what are the cross-platform capabilities for Terraform?
There are 100 plus providers which you can use. So there can be any cloud provider for which HashiCorp provides. They provide a API. HashiCorp can actually help build you that platform.
Okay.
We can see that it's getting destroyed. Let's come back to our instance and let me refresh. It says it's being terminated, and that's what's happening. It's also now terminating the security group, and that's done. Okay, let's move back to the presentation, and I'll hand over back to Monika then.
Yeah, so let's get started with the Terratest. Now the first question is, what is Terratest? So Terratest is a Go library that provides better and helpful functions for testing infrastructure. So Terratest is something which provides support for testing different platforms, uh, to write the test for different configuration platforms, which includes Terraform, Packer, Docker, and Cube, with cloud providers as AWS, GCP, and Azure. Now the question is that, okay, now we get to know that, uh, suppose we have this infrastructure built on the top of Terraform. Now we have decided to go ahead with Terratest, and now the question is how to do that. I mean, what is the basic requirement of using the Terratest, and another thing is that how we are going to write the test. So these are our next set of questions. So the very first requirement is Go testing framework. So we should be having Go installed in our local. This is the basic requirement. And after that, we can install Terratest by using this command, which is mentioned, Go install and the library, Terratest library. Apart from that, if we have this Mac OS, if someone is using Mac OS, then they can install it with the help of Brew install Terratest. Now the question is that, okay, we have installed Terratest. Now, what are the steps involved in writing the test versus the execution of the test? Okay. So the very first step is we have to write the code using Go, and and suppose we have written the code in a Go, and we have to put that test file name ending with _test.go. Only then this Go test command will recognize that, okay, it's a Go file. Okay, so after writing the test, we can execute the test with the help of Go test and the file name. So when we trigger this command, okay, so after that, what tasks are running in the background is, so as in the previous demo we have seen that first one is Terraform init, another one after that we have this Terraform apply, and then we are destroying the Terraform with Terraform destroy. Okay, so all these things, what we are doing manually, it is handled within the test. Okay, so when we trigger this command Go test and the test name, test file name, after that what happens is that it uses Terratest to deploy the infrastructure. So it is deploying to AWS, okay, by using Terraform init and then Terraform apply internally. After that, the third step is validate infrastructure with Terratest. So in the first example, we have asserted, in the hello world example, in the Terraform demo, we have put the assertion on hello world. And in the second, which is AWS, we are making HTTP request on that. Okay. And after that, after doing all these assertions, and after, let's say, we are making HTTP request or API calls or SSH connections, depending on what kind of test we have written, internally what it does is it undeploys the infrastructure. Okay, so it basically means that it is using internally Terraform destroy to undeploy the infrastructure. Yeah. So let's have this Terratest demo.
Okay, I'll take back control and let's do that. Let me come to the main file again. Here we go. So we're gonna use the same file. Let me just, let's say, undo all the changes I did, because that's gonna make my life easier than writing another file. I'm just gonna say we're gonna do a hello world again, and we know how it works. So I'm just gonna do hello world. Right now, I just want to test it. Right. So how can we test it? Is that we need Go. So one way is that you install Brew install Go, or you can actually go to Terraform. You just go Google Terraform and you land to this page, which is the gruntwork.io, terraform.gruntwork.io, and that'll give you a link to install Go over here, which will lead you to this documentation page, and you just have to click on download go, and it'll download it automatically according to your operating system. Once that's done, you just have to install Terraform, which again would be what Monika mentioned. Go install github.gruntwork-io/Terraform. And I've already done that for you. So all I'm gonna do is in this directory, something that's very important is in Go, which is you have to initialize a module. Okay, so that can be done by go mod init, and you can just write test, and it says it's created a Go module for me, which is called test. Now all I need to do is write a test file. So I'll say Terraform hello world test.go. Okay. Now that's simple. Just create a file, and we know that our package is test over here, right? Now, whenever I'm writing something, I'll need some libraries, right? So I'll import Terraform, and we'll use that, and we're using testing, right? So let's see what all gets automatically gets imported, and then we'll understand how do we press that. So I'll write a method. I'll name it test Terraform hello world. And I'll define a test runner, and I'm using testing, right? And I'll get a test controller out of it. So it automatically imported test for me, testing for me. Right? And now there's something which is we'll use is Terraform again, because we automated the Terraform itself. So we'll use Terraform options. And so Terraform, right? But it says you've not imported Terraform. So let's try and just quickly do that. It says Terraform's here, right? It says you want to get that package. Let's get that package. And let's see if what happens with that. We want a default retry to happen. Let's use Terraform dot options, which we just defined. Options, we're gonna give the directory where our test is, our main file is, which is in the same directory. So I'm just giving quotes. It says that you don't have a directory searcher. Okay, now this should work. And now it's just saying that you've not used Terraform options anywhere else. Just to be safe, let's just define what we want to do last, which is we want to destroy everything. So things work or not, we always want to destroy, because that's what the purpose is, right? Because the infrastructure is very costly, and we don't want our clients to be cost anything. We're using these Terraform options. And now we use Terraform and we use init. I'm sorry, this should be intended properly inside this block. Right? uh, we do Terraform init and apply because we want to do both of them, and we provide this test with Terraform options. Where does which file does it want to init and apply, right? Now I want to define another variable, which is that I want an output, right? So I want to understand what that output is. Output, and that output is supposed to be hello world, right? Now I want to assert this output, right? So it brings in assert, and how do I want to assert it is that this should be equal to, just a moment, assert the output. To be oh, that's problem. Okay, let me check what I've done wrong. Just a moment.
It's assert dot equal, and in the brackets t comma the text comma output.
Yeah, it should be equals output. Just basic asserting. It still says it's the wrong formatting for some reason.
Yeah, in the brackets it's t comma.
Yeah, because you're not providing the test controller. Perfect. So that's what we need to do. Let's say test, and we can run this file. Let's find what file there is in this. There is Terraform hello world test go, and let's try and run this test. Let's see. And you'll see that what the test did is that it's running this function we created. It says Terraform init. It says initializing the backend, getting the plugins as we did earlier. And then it says it's successfully initialized. Then we do Terraform apply. And after apply, it says once it completely applied, it says this is the output. And then once the output is asserted, only then it is going to destroy. So it destroys. Right? That was very quick. In the meanwhile, I switched tabs and then it happened really quickly. Let's try and run this again, and so that you can see what happened. It's so you see it's a very quick process because it's automated. Now let's try and do the same for AWS. Right? Let's just name this AWS right away, and we're gonna use the same Terraform file. I'm just gonna undo everything again because I don't want to write everything, or do I have to? I'll have to do that again. Let's see if I have something for you already in place. Yeah, we can use a file. Let me write that down. So it's the same thing we did. And let's write this test for you. Let's say Terraform AWS Hello World. We just still want to destroy and we still want to apply. But this time, we can't assert the output the same way, right? Because this is not output, we're getting a public IP, right? And you can't say this is hello world because we don't know what we're getting. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get the Terraform output, and that output is gonna be public IP, right? Because that's the function we defined. And again, we need the test controller and the Terraform options. Now it says you've not used public IP. That's the error. But then this doesn't work, right? Because we want to still get a URL out of that public IP. So I have to create another variable. And I'm going to use string formatting. So I'll say I want a string. So string.
Ankur, just a quick time check.
Yeah. And we're gonna create an HTTP request out of it. And that HTTP request needs to be string appended. And we're gonna do an ATT. And let's say we have use this public variable which we created. Now we need an HTTP request to happen. So we need a HTTP helper, which it's not importing directly. So let's define that. Let's say HTTP helper, right? So that where this HTTP helper comes from is it's the same. It comes from here. It comes from Terraform modules. Put that in quotes. Okay, and we're gonna say HTTP helper. So it doesn't even equal to, and you'll see that this will work. So it's called github.com, the same Terraform modules, and there's a module called HTTP helper which you can use, and that helper would essentially give you an HTTP get with retry, this one. And what we're gonna retry is with this test controller, we're gonna hit this URL and we expect a 200 because it's a GET request. So HTTP GET we're using, and in that GET request, we are expecting a hello world, right? And we're gonna try this 30 times because it took us a while to get that hello world, right? So I'm gonna give that in every 5 seconds, you try it. Let's mention seconds. And it says you don't know, I don't know what time is. Let's quickly check if it can fetch time. It fetch time, and let's see if we can fetch this also. It can fetch format, right? And it says there's something wrong with assert. Yeah, because not using assert anymore. So let's remove that. And we're not using that .url, so I'm going to remove that also. That should fix all of our errors. And let's try and run this. Let's see what happens. Let's say go test. It's the same file. So I'm just gonna hit enter. And it started it did init, it initialized the backup, it's again getting AWS HashiCorp AWS, the same version. It initialized it. It's just gonna do apply. So let's see what's happening when it's applying. We don't need to, but let's see what changes are happening. Is it gonna create a security group, or is it gonna create? It's still trying to run the command. And now it started creating the security group. So we can see that there's a new security group over here. See what happens next. It's now creating to start to create an instance. Let's go back to instance, see what's happening. So there's a pending state in the instance over here, which is just getting created, right? Which is right now, about 13. And now we don't want to worry, we don't have to worry about when it comes up and we get a hello world, because it's an automated script, so it'll do all of it by itself. It got an IP, now it's gonna try to hit the URL, it formed the URL by itself. It's trying to hit a get request. It failed, but it is gonna sleep for 5 seconds, which we mentioned.
And here in the terminal, we are seeing that it is making HTTP call, HTTP request, and it will keep on, making this call for number one is for 30 times, and number second is until we get 200 okay and we get the response.
And you see, it started destroying now, because it got a response over here with 200, and then this was the call it made at 12:16, and then it just started running the next command, which is destroy, and now it's going to destroy the instance which it created over here. So if I refresh, it says it's shutting down this instance, and if we come back, you'll see that it gets destroyed. And it says it's destroyed the instance and the security group, and you're done, and the test has passed. Let's move back to the presentation now. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll move to the next slide. Now, what we have done till now is that we have created in our infrastructure with the Terraform. We have written some tests with Terratest. Okay, but is this the only quality gates? Like when we say this, that okay, we have written the test as these infrastructure tests. Uh, do we think that we have just this as a quality gate? Don't we think that this infrastructure testing is a very holistic and it's a very generic term which has been used? Okay, so in this section we are going to discuss about what will be our testing level, and at each testing level what we are going to test. Okay, so for infrastructure testing we have, so what we can think of is, first one is the static analysis. So it's just not about writing our infrastructure code, it's also about writing the code with the best practices and standards. Okay, and with the static analysis we are going to see that okay, our infrastructure code is as per the standard or not. Okay, another, the next level we have is unit test. So with the unit test we are going to evaluate the behavior of code in isolation, like how it works as unit. Okay, after that we have property test. So each policy, here what I have written is each policy becomes a property of and very invariant that a test evaluates and asserts. Okay, so in simpler example, with the property test, what I'm going to test is that uh, infrastructure must have defined some set of policies. Okay, when it comes to, let's say, AWS, so we want our infrastructure to run some types of instance types. Okay, so this is one of the policy which we have defined. Now with property test we are ensuring that okay, this particular policy is accepted in our infrastructure, like it is getting followed. Okay, next one is integration test. So this is one of the example which we have seen previously. What Ankur has written as one of the tests is he has tested the Terraform, what we are passing from Terraform with AWS as an integration. Okay, so these 4 level of test we can do. Yeah, we'll move to the next slide. So now let's discuss about this in detail. So with the testing levels, first, as we have discussed in the previous slide, we have static analysis. So static analysis means statistically checking code for syntactic and structural issues. So what we are going to answer in this is that is the written code adhered to the best practices, and how we are going to do that? By linting or running some scan using semgrep or Terraform validate. So Terraform internally provides some commands. So Terraform validate is one of the internal command with which we are going to validate how the configurations are written. Okay, and semgrep is something which is like which is used used across different configuration platforms like Terraform, and then we have Ansible, after that AWS. Like semgrep is used across platforms. Okay, so next we have unit test. So with the unit test we are going to test single unit, how single unit works in isolation. One of the example of this is that how we are going to validate the plan file, like, or how we are going to validate the plan which we have just seen in the demo. Okay, and how we are going to do this is by writing the test. And what are the other options we have? Like we can do it by either using Terratest or Pulumi. Okay, so next we have property test. So with the property test we are ensuring that the code written against the infrastructure must follow some policies. And in this, one of the example is we are going to answer how we are going to validate availability zones used by EC2 instance. Like if I have this policy defined that my infrastructure should run should run in, let's say, US East 2, then how we are going to validate that? Okay, that is again by writing the test as a part of property test level using Sentinel. Sentinel is something which is enterprise edition, and Terraform again provides something very internal command, which is Terraform compliance. Okay. So after that, next we have integration test. So with the integration test, we are going to check the integration with of the integration of our infrastructure with the different platforms. For example, Terraform with AWS, which we have just checked just now. And what we have seen is that is the infrastructure is deployed correctly to AWS, and are we able to access it? Okay, that is again by writing the test, and we have used Terratest, and we can also use Pulumi. Okay, now what we have discussed till now is that, okay, we have Terratest to write the code, and we have different test levels. Now we have this thing is that what are the other options available apart from Terratest? Okay, so number one, I want to correct, there is a myth that Terratest can only be used with Terraform. The answer is no. Okay, so we can use Terratest as a standalone Go library to check our Docker files, to validate our Docker files, to validate our again different configuration platforms, which includes Packers, and then different cloud providers, AWS, GCP, and Microsoft Azure. Okay. So what are the other options available? First one is AWS CDK. So AWS internally also provides, it has its own library or set of toolkit, which is called as AWS CDK. Next one we have is Inspect AWS, and there is another something very similar library is OSPEC. Okay, the problem with this is that so with Terratest we have seen that, okay, uh, when we have triggered this go test command, okay, it has deployed the infrastructure. Okay, it has executed some set of commands which we have given, and at the end it has undeployed it. Whereas with Inspect and OSPEC, uh, we actually have to do it this deploy and undeploy steps manually. Okay, so this is the one issue with this Inspect. Next we have Terraform compliance. So it checks for policies, but it actually we can use it just for Terraform. We have to switch back to Sentinel, which is enterprise edition. Okay, kind of paid. Next we have Pulumi. So Pulumi is something very Pulumi is something very similar. It provides very nice set of features as what Terratest is giving. But one problem with Terratest is that we actually have to find references. We actually have to uh, find the way how we can write the test, the property test. Whereas Pulumi has some specific defined criteria for unit test, for property test, and for integration test. Okay, but when it comes to documentation, Terratest and Pulumi, though they are at the same place, and their open source contribution, whereas like answer to some of the issues, they are equally good. Okay, so what I feel is that Terratest and Pulumi, they go hand in hand. So just a quick recap of what we have discussed in this session. So what we have discussed so far is number one, about the cloud infrastructure. What is cloud infrastructure? In that, what we have discussed is infrastructure as a code. After that, we have moved to Terraform, where we have created our infrastructure with Terraform. Then we have tested, we have written some test on by using Terraform testing, infrastructure testing with Terratest. And then what we have discussed is that different quality gates or testing levels involved in the infrastructure testing. Okay, so
That's all
now,
about Terratest. Do we have any questions that we can answer?
There are a couple of questions in the Q&A. So Ashish Keter Paul asked, like, where is this retention policy defined? Retry policy, sorry, retention, retry policy defined.
Retry policy.
Yeah.
So with respect to the retry policy, I think we were using this one of the function, I guess, or one of the methods, which is from Go, which is HTTP get with retry. In that, we can define how many times we can retry, and maybe it has some default retries which are also defined as a part of that method, which is HTTP get with retry.
So it's basically a Terratest module, and it is very readily available in Terratest documentations also. So there are a bunch of modules which you can go through, which Terraform provides. So I'll also try and share a link for that. So this is the package repository, and this is the documentation for HTTP helper which I've opened. But then for different modules also, you can see what all modules are available and the instructions to use them. So Go also has like a very good documentation which you can use, and you can just search the package you want to use.
Okay. So another question is, like, is it necessary to apply or destroy resources via Terratest, or we can just use for testing and create and destroy resources via Terraform?
So I think
So the purpose of this was to automate everything, right?
Yeah.
And again, when it comes to AWS, or when you talk about your own project or application, you're not going to use a free instance, right? You're going to use an original instance, which is going to either cost you or your client which you're running the project for. So we don't want to create a cost out of it. We just want to use that server for, let's say, 10 to 15 seconds to apply, 10 to 15 seconds to destroy, and then just to make a small HTTP request as long it takes to just come up. So the purpose of automating is, again, to save the cost, and always remember to destroy the instance so that you don't get charged unnecessarily. And if you've also created a wrong instance and the test failed, it still destroys. So there's no chance you're getting a resource which is just running for no reason.
Okay. Do we need to learn Go for Terratest? So is it not language agnostic?
I think not. It's not necessary to learn Go as a full-fledged language. The basics of Go is very much important when we are going to work in Terratest. But I think the documentation of Terratest itself is very nicely written. It's very easy to understand. So I mean, if I answer to the question, like, the basics of Go is required when we are going to create full-fledged framework. The basics of Go is required like when to get started with it, and then again another step is to create full-fledged framework where we are adding some set of libraries for as a test runner, the Go libraries as a test runner, and then again for some reporting. So in that case, maybe we'll be needing some more in-depth knowledge about Go.
Cool. So I think so we have covered all the questions. So folks, if you have any more questions, kindly post it in the Q&A channel. And once again, thank you, Monika and Ankur, for this wonderful session.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Maha, shall we start the polling? Yeah.
It will take just a minute, I guess. We will start.
Okay. After the polling, we will take a quick 5 minutes break, and then we can reconnect again to just a refresher. So after that, we will have the final session.
Yeah. The next session is database integration testing.